While Washington is perhaps understandably focused on Donald Trump's pending impeachment, all the details that are coming out, the work of Congress continues, and it continues with Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who debuted her new multi-part poverty plan. Here she is talking about it.
America today is at its wealthiest point than in its entire history. And in fact, many would argue that today the United States represents one of the richest societies in global history. Except among all these record profits, 40 million Americans are living in poverty, and 18.5 million Americans are living in extreme poverty, which is measured as less than $2 a day. That's why I'm so excited to introduce a suite of legislation, including 5 bills and 1 resolution that begins to chip away at our issues of economic injustice. And we're calling it a just society.
There's of course more to the video. You can look it up now. This on Twitter was an exclusive that they had with Representative AOC. It is depressing to say this. This is the sort of policy suite that is perhaps, I think, objectively the most important thing that the government could be working on, and no one is gonna care. Especially today, especially this week, but just in general. I mean, you talk about the concerns of working class Americans, poor Americans, nobody cares, well, unfortunately.
As impeachment talk comes, and then Republicans and pundits will talk about all the things that Democrats are not doing. It's ironic that as things like this happen, first they ignore the things that many Democrats are doing, specifically AOC in this case. And also, they will talk about the things Democrats are doing, and they'll use this as a bludgeon against every other Democrat that's running. Oh, you guys are lining behind AOC and her crazy policies because they're not implementing any crazy policies. Yeah. Which one is it? Is it they're not implementing any policies, or that the policies are too crazy for you to handle? You don't want the American people to really know what it is that they should receive.
Exactly. And look, when I say nobody cares, what I mean is the people whose job it is to report on this don't care, and they coincidentally also happen to be incredibly wealthy people. It's one of the reasons I've recently switched over to an idea I read about where you're supposed to, when you report on something, if you have a conflict of interest, you're supposed to talk about it. But if it's a conflict of economic interest for yourself, a policy that will affect you economically negatively, for some reason you don't have to talk about that. They should have to talk about that. They're millionaires, they should admit it when talking about taxes on the wealthy, for instance. So I do care about this, so let's jump into give you an idea of what this is about. The bills are packaged as a bundle called a Just Society. It would expand access to benefits by updating the federal poverty line to include expenses like childcare, internet access, and can be adjusted based on where someone lives. About 40 million Americans live in poverty. That should be a stat you hear every day, by the way. So 6 parts to this. We're gonna just quickly run through them to give you an idea of how all-encompassing this is. It's like something a presidential candidate would put out these days. Her Place to Prosper Act would try to help with the housing crisis by introducing a 3% national cap on annual rent increases, among other provisions. We saw something like this in Bernie Sanders' recent housing bill that came out. Individuals who have been convicted of a criminal offense would be ensured access to all federal public benefits in the Mercy and Reentry Act. And the Embrace Act would guarantee federal public benefits access to anyone, regardless of their immigration status. The Uplift Our Workers Act, meanwhile, would prompt the Department of Labor and the Office of Management and Budget to create a worker-friendly score for federal contractors. Incredibly important, considering that very often those federal contractors are raking in massive contracts, sometimes no bid, and often with very little regulation in terms of how the money is being spent, and as she's pointing out, how they're actually treating their workers. So that would be great to see. There's also, by the way, a resolution entitling A Just Society guarantees the economic, social, and cultural rights of all, that orders the Senate to ratify the UN Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. So look, this obviously needs to go hand in hand with other pieces of legislation. But this sort of thing, were this to be the priority of Congress, and a Congress that could get something done, what could they do that would be more beneficial to more people than something like this?
So since a lot of times things are attacked as saying that you're coming after Americans, every time that a lot of times people who oppose actual American rights, just point out the things that are outlined in this type of policy. They're trying to protect against rent hikes that'll allow people to actually stay in their homes. Workers' rights, things that work for people to have society, that society can work for them in general. Who are those people, what types of things that he's benefiting and who are they against. So the person who's fighting against it, look into who they are. Because every time a regular American fights against the things that are going on with billionaires continue to take money from everyone else, they're seen as just lazy and want to sit around and just take things that are entitlements.
Yeah.
What is it there's other people who are against real policy changes? Why are they against it? Look into them.
Yeah, exactly.
Start going after them the way they go after regular Americans.
And look, I know the Grim Reaper in the Senate is of course never gonna allow this to pass. This is just, you're just trying to give stuff to your voters or whatever. Yeah, I know that you're gonna assume that it's undocumented immigrants or whatever. It's not. It's probably a lot of Democrats, sure, but there's a lot of red hats in that 40 million people. There are a lot of devoted Trump-trained conductors in those 40 million people that are going to respond positively if this sort of thing were talked about. That is how you win over people, not by pandering to them or ignoring things like racism, misogyny, and all of that, but by actually addressing the issues that affect not just Democrats, but all sorts of people, the working class across partisan lines. And so great job by AOC to keep pushing not just on accountability for the government, but amazing, bold, progressive proposals. If you're the right sort of progressive, you should be able to do both of those things, and it is your responsibility to do that, and she's doing a great job of it.
They can keep calling it socialism and keep saying it's anti-American, but then ask Americans, is this type of stuff anti-American to you?
Yeah. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.